Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 8, Calcutta, 1928. The euphoria Jinnah felt at the start of 1928 was to dissipate long before the year ended. His joy was a brief remission. By year's end, the castle of Hindu-Muslim unity, built on shifting sands of communal mistrust, suspicion, and doubt, would be washed away by tides of frustration and discontent. There was no true turning back, no restoration of that balmy climate before Nagpur. It was but momentary delusion Jinnah experienced, induced by the enormity of Birkenhead's contempt for all Indian politicians. How insignificant such English arrogance suddenly made his conflicts with Congress colleagues seem. Immediately after Calcutta, Jinnah returned to Bombay to organize the boycott of Simon and his commission's imminent entry there. Jinnah chaired the local boycott committee and his assistant, Chagla, was its secretary. I must say, Chagla recalled, Jinnah was as firm as a rock as far as the question of boycott of the commission was concerned. Proposals were made that the boycott should be only political and not social. Jinnah would not agree and did not give an inch. He said a boycott was a boycott and it must be total and complete. We held many meetings in connection with the boycott campaign. We had a mass meeting at the Chowpatty Sands. Simon arrived on February 3, 1928, and Jinnah's boycott proved totally effective. Gandhi wrote to tender my congratulations to the organizers for the very great success they achieved. It did my soul good to see liberals, independents, and congressmen ranged together on the same platform. Birkenhead had briefed Simon on the eve of his departure from London. He wrote to remind Viceroy Irwin the next day. We have always relied on the non-boycotting Muslims, on the depressed community, on the business interests, and on many others to break down the attitude of boycott. You and Simon must be the judges whether or not it is expedient in these directions to try to make a breach in the wall of antagonism. Officialdom cracked down with a vengeance as the nationwide boycott proved more effective than Birkenhead dreamed it would be. The primacy of Jinnah's role in this boycott was underscored by Birkenhead's singling him out as the leader to be undermined. I should advise Simon to see all the stages important people who are not boycotting the commission. Birkenhead urged Irwin, particularly Muslims and the depressed classes. I should widely advertise all his interviews with representative Muslims. He then announced, as badly as it had ever been put into writing by a British official, the whole policy of divide et impera, advising that Simon's obvious goal was to terrify the immense Hindu population by the apprehension that the commission is being got hold of by the Muslims and may present a report altogether destructive of the Hindu position, thereby securing a solid Muslim support and leaving Jinnah high and dry. On February 12th, Jinnah attended the all-parties conference chaired by Congress President Ansari in Delhi. Motilal and Jawaharlal were there, as were Lajpat Rai, Malaviya, and Jayakar, and most of the other leaders of political India. Gandhi did not attend. He remained at his Sabarmati ashram, placing as he did so little faith in constitutional planning. The conference, however, was convened to do just that, seeking to provide a single Indian alternative to whatever formula Simon and the others might fashion. The first question discussed by the conference was the objective to be aimed at in the Constitution. It was proposed that the Constitution should aim at establishing what is called a dominion form of government in India. Objection was taken by some members to this on the ground that the Congress had decided in favor of independence as the goal and no lesser goal should be aimed at. Jawaharlal Nehru and ex-Congress President S. Srinivasa Iyengar 1874 to 1941, led the latter group, differing sharply from Motilal as well as Jinnah on this point. The formula finally agreed upon was to frame a constitution for the establishment of full responsible government. The problem of Muslim rights and representation was less easily resolved. Wrangling and haggling continued for over a week till the strain was too great for me and I fled to avoid the riot and insurrection, Jawaharlal Nehru reported to Gandhi. Jinnah tried to remain optimistic. The budget session of Delhi's assembly had started before the all parties conference was over, and he convinced a number of his independent colleagues to sign a communal unity appeal as drafted. 10 fruitless days after the conference had begun, however, it ended without agreement on any Muslim question. Jayakar, Malaviya, and Lajpat Rai wanted to eliminate separate electorates entirely, yet they were unwilling to concede any of the compensating constitutional changes Jinnah demanded in return. Jinnah's position on separate electorates had always been equivocal. They were a necessary evil, the sort of protection required by Muslims only as long as the community remained too weak and too educationally backward to aspire to anything approaching equality with Hindus. There were, however, ways of assuring Muslims sufficient real security and constitutional leverage to make such affirmative action crutches dispensable. Jinnah had, indeed, formulated such proposals in 1927. They were accepted by the then still United League in March and substantially accepted by Congress in May of 1927. Those Delhi Muslim proposals, as they came to be called, agreed to the institution of joint electorates under certain conditions. This strictly conditional concession and the proposals that followed were, like the Lucknow Pact, unique product of Jinnah's ingenious constitutional lawyer's mind. He was actually able to get 29 leading Muslims, including conservatives like Shafi and Abdul Rahman, to agree to abandoning the League's separate electorate foundation stone, which gave Muslims alone the right to vote for Muslim candidates and would have obliged all Muslim politicians to appeal to the entire electorate of their constituency in future contests. Minimum numbers of Muslim candidates would still have to be elected in all provinces where Muslims remained minorities, as under the Lucknow Pact, but similar numbers of Hindu representatives would be required in each Muslim majority province. Since every candidate would be obliged to appeal to joint electorates for support, they would all have to tone down, if not entirely abstain from, narrow communal rhetoric and run only on national issues and appeal more often to secular interests of economic development and reform. All Muslim candidates elected under such a scheme might conceivably be congressmen or khilafatists rather than Muslim leaguers. It was a bold political concession and proved how broad and selfless Jinnah's commitment to national principles and the goal of helping India attain full independence remained. Nor were the constitutional concessions he demanded in return any less appropriate, though they would have given Muslim majorities control of 3 new provinces, Sindh, the northwest frontier, and Balochistan, and the proportional control they deserved by virtue of their recent population strides in 2 long-established provincial governments, the Punjab and Bengal. Sindh had till then remained administratively under Bombay's provincial control, a relatively recent anomaly of British conquest, which was hardly justified on deeper historic, geographic, religious, or ethnic grounds. The northwest frontier and Balochistan were still deemed too backward, tribal, arid, turbulent by the British to enjoy the freedoms of full provincial status. Hence, they continued to be administered by centrally appointed martial autocrats without any provincial assemblies. Since the 1921 census, Punjabi and Bengali Muslims had gained absolute majorities within both of those powerful provinces, but such demographic advance was not reflected in the composition of their legislatures. Jinnah's proposals would, therefore, have given Muslims elective majority in 5 provincial governments. The final demand was for not less than one-third Muslim representation in the central legislature, also to be chosen by mixed electorates. Jinnah sensed well before the end of February 1928 that Hindu Mahasabha pressure had persuaded Congress to back off from its acceptance the previous May of his new constitutional compromise. He had to remain in Delhi, however, till the assembly concluded its budget session that March, and Jinnah convened his League Council, which officially regretted that the Hindu Mahasabha had practically rejected the Muslim League proposals. Forced to face the sobering reality of his own countrymen's parochialism, Jinnah now looked to Lord Irwin for help. He had observed the lean, long-suffering viceroy closely in the assembly's chamber during the past 2 months and had developed respect for his intellect, diligence and integrity, virtues Jinnah always admired. The longer the all-parties conference riot continued, in fact, the more attractive Irwin's cool but competent manner must have seemed to Jinnah, who finally approached the viceroy in March, suggesting 2 ways of resolving the current constitutional impasse. One was by turning Simon's commission into a mixed commission, Irwin reported to Birkenhead, and the other was by establishing a twin Indian commission with parallel authority. Irwin linked both ideas and found them especially appealing since Jinnah promised to take the brunt of the attack in India if either of his cooperative options was implemented. Birkenhead refused, however, to consider such changes, pig-headedly insisting it does not do to take these people too seriously. Indeed, I find it increasingly difficult to take any Indian politicians very seriously. Once again, Jinnah found himself without effective allies. Weary and depressed, he went home to Bombay on March 30th, 1928. Ruthie was not waiting for him in Southcote. She had moved to the Taj Mahal Hotel, renting a suite there by the month. They were never again to reside under the same roof. Still, she kept track of his whereabouts, writing kanji that day. Jinnah returns today at 2:30 p.m., so I understand. She could never quite let go. She sailed on the P&O for Paris on April 10th with her mother. Jinnah steamed out of Bombay a month later aboard the SS Rajputana. Srinivasa Iyengar and Diwan Chaman Lal were his fellow passengers that May. Chaman was headed for an ILO conference in Geneva and wrote that he found Jinnah frankly disgusted. Minor differences over Sindh and majority representations by reservation and reforms for the Northwest Frontier Province have wrecked for the moment all chances of unity. Give me, says Muhammad Ali Jinnah, 3 leaders to join me over a united program which was all but accepted at Delhi, and Swaraj will not be a mere dream but a matter brought within the realm of real politics. Jinnah is frankly in a despondent mood. He is one of the few men who have no personal motives to nurse or personal aims to advance. His integrity is beyond question, yet he has been the loneliest of men. Jinnah had no official business in London that summer, but met with old Liberal and Labour friends, including Ramsay MacDonald and Lord Reading, and he visited Dublin at the invitation of Fenner Brockway, Ireland's leading pro-Indian member of parliament, who had just toured India. Jinnah was in Ireland when Chaman Lal, who had visited Paris after his work in Geneva ended, conveyed an urgent message about Ruthie. She was delirious with a temperature of 106 degrees. He reached Paris in 2 days and spoke with Lady Petit immediately after checking into George V. Ruthie's mother informed him that her daughter was feeling better, but then Chaman Lal arrived to report that he had just come from her hospital bed, where she was dying. He sat still for a couple of minutes, struggling with himself, and asked me to telephone the clinic, which I did. He spoke to the nurse in charge and confirmed what I had told him. Thumping the arm of his chair, he said, "Come, let us go. We must save her." I left him at the clinic for nearly 3 hours, waiting at a nearby cafe, and when he returned, the anxiety had vanished from his face. He had arranged for a new clinic and a new medical advisor, and all was going to be well. But alas, although Mrs. Jinnah recovered, she did not stay on with her husband and returned ahead of him to Bombay, and I do not think they met again. While Jinnah was abroad, Congress President Dr. Ansari chaired a May 18th meeting in Bombay of some members of the February All-Party Conference who resolved to appoint a commission led by Motilal Nehru to draft a nationalist constitution by July 1st. This Nehru Commission, the Congress counterpart to the Simon Commission, proved equally ineffectual, however, completing its deliberations without powerful Muslim representation and failing to win the support of Muslim India's leading luminaries, even as Simon had failed in India as a whole. The Nehru Commission could not complete its work on time. Motilal was quite busy that summer with politics, still seeking what Gandhi called the crown of the Congress presidency, more for Jawaharlal than himself. Motilal would agree in December to wear that crown rather than allow it to elude his family altogether. The Nehru Commission met in Lucknow during the last week in August to hammer out a report based on proposals drafted by Motilal and Jawaharlal in Allahabad that summer. Motilal tried to anticipate Jinnah's objections and to adopt positions acceptable to him on the most thorny issues. He invited Chagla to Lucknow, where Sarojini Naidu and Annie Besant met the Nehrus and Sir Taj Bahadur Sapru, then leader of the National Liberal Federation. I think my main contribution to the report was my steadfast adherence to the belief in joint electorates. Chagla noted. Motilal Nehru for a moment thought that in order to get the minorities to accept the report, we should agree to separate electorates. I argued we were drafting a constitution not for the present but for the future. Chagla was then 27, a document which was expected to endure for a long time, and we must not therefore incorporate into it any principle which on the face of it was anti-national. Ultimately, Motilal agreed. Chagla accepted the report at Lucknow on behalf of the Muslim League. When Jinnah returned to Bombay, his young assistant was the first person to greet him in his ship's cabin and found Jinnah furious with him. Instead of acting impetuously, Jinnah said he would reserve judgment and we will consider the report at a regular meeting of the League. For Jinnah and Chagla, however, there would be no return to earlier days of cordial friendship and trust. Nor would Jinnah ever agree to accept the Nehru report as anything other than the Hindu position on his Delhi Muslim proposals of the previous year. Democratic though the Nehru report may have been in principle, it fundamentally repudiated the Lucknow Pact and offered no compensatory advantages to the Muslim community. There were platitudinous exhortations such as the doing away of communal electorates is intended to promote communal unity by making each community more or less dependent on the other at the time of the election. Such words must have sounded disingenuous to those who had lived through years of violence and communal discrimination. Jinnah, at any rate, was not prone to accept superficial promises nor to express himself prematurely. His first pronouncement concerning the Nehru report came late in October. My position as President of the All India Muslim League is one which does not permit me to anticipate decisions of the League. At the same time, he appealed to all Muslims not to be alarmed. I see no reason for consternation and stampede. Muslims should organize themselves, stand united, and should press every reasonable point for the protection of their community. The day after Jinnah's remarks hit the headlines, Motilal wrote to invite him to join the committee and attend its forthcoming Delhi meeting. Jinnah refused Motilal's invitation. The Muslim League had not as yet had a chance to meet to consider the Nehru proposals. He argued, and as the president of the League, it would not do for me to anticipate their decisions. It was one of his most effective negotiating techniques, part of the secret of his singular power, for he always magnified himself by the force of his entire party whenever he felt unhappy about the terms of an offer. He was just then leaving for Sindh to take charge of the defense of a wealthy and powerful Muslim Pir of its northernmost district. Pir Pagado had been jailed at Sakhar for allegedly wrongful confinement of someone and for keeping a large number of arms unauthorizedly in his possession. His trial was held in a special magistrate court in the Sakhar district. There, Jinnah stayed in the government circuit house, Sakhar's only decent accommodation, on a hilltop overlooking the Indus and the massive dam that spanned it. He commanded 500 rupees a day, a very handsome fee at the time. Although the magistrate convicted Pagado, Jinnah appealed 2 years later and had his client's sentence reduced. Two significant things occurred while Jinnah was in Sindh. He met young Muhammad Kohro, who then worked for Pir Pagado and was destined to become independent Pakistan's chief minister of Sindh, and Mian Sir Haji Harun, a princely ruler of neighboring Khairpur state and one of Jinnah's independent party assembly colleagues, held a fete in his honor at the ornate Khairpur house, which Jinnah attended in a most fashionable modern Sindhi costume, black sherwani, churidar pajama, and pump shoes. Jinnah took this occasion to speak to the Muslim elite of Sindh, several of whom would become his strongest backers and lieutenants during the 2 remaining decades of his life. Before leaving Sindh on November 10th, Jinnah had openly discussed his grave concerns and pessimisms about Motilal's committee and its report with fellow Muslims. He would be going to Calcutta in December, but anticipated quite accurately, as it turned out, that the convention there might prove the parting of the ways. Had he decided, in fact, prior to December in Calcutta, that it was time to abandon indigenous all-party search for a constitutional solution acceptable to every shade, caste, and religious community of India's pluralistic spectrum? Had he concluded that it might be more profitable and less hazardous for the Muslim League to go it alone in negotiating with the British? For what had all the time spent in all parties haggling accomplished, after all? Were he and the leaders of the Hindu Mahasabha any closer to consensus than they had been 5 years ago? With increasingly fragile health, he must have felt more keenly the futility of long meetings with hundreds of shouting, importunate delegates, some of whom could hardly speak English language, most of whom had never drafted a legal document. Nor was he simply being middle-aged and irritable, though he would soon be at least 52. At Lucknow, the meeting of Jinnah's League Council did not go as he hoped it would, and to his personal disappointment, he found many good Muslim colleagues so enamored of the Nehru report that he dared not call for a vote on it in early November. Even the Maharaja of Mahmudabad, who was elected that year's president of the Muslim League, liked the report and was ready to accept it. Chagla was overjoyed to find so many allies and hoped Jinnah would see the wisdom of his earlier actions, But Jinnah remained set against the Nehru Constitution, viewing it only as a Hindu document. Motilal, Dr. Ansari, and Maulana Azad met him in Lucknow, urging him to attend a special meeting of the Nehru Committee before the League or Congress met in December, and before the all parties convention would be convened in Calcutta to try to fashion a compromise formula on communal issues. Jinnah turned them down. He still insisted that first his league had to meet and officially take its stand. He asked Motilal to postpone the convention till early next year after both annual sessions of League and Congress. Then he returned to Bombay and prepared for a provincial League meeting which was held on November 23rd, hoping at least to win a majority in his hometown. But Chagla stood up and argued so effectively for the Nehru report that Jinnah adjourned the meeting without putting the question to a vote. Had he sensed once again that on this issue he sided with the minority of his own party? Jinnah was growing short-tempered, feeling more isolated and dispirited. In an earlier confidential letter to his own committee, Motilal had reported after meeting with Jinnah in Lucknow that Jinnah objected to the convention being held before the meeting of the Muslim League on the ground that the authority represented the League at the convention could only be derived from the League. I may mention that had the report of the committee and the Lucknow decision been taken into consideration, they would have been approved by a greater majority of the Muslim League's council than that which elected the Maharaja of Mahmudabad as the president of the League. It is expected that the result will be the same at the open session of the League. Motilal was obviously kept well informed of Jinnah's plight within his own party and felt less need to cater to his demands than he might otherwise have done. He misjudged Jinnah's resilience, however, by underestimating his powers. It was a fatal error not only for his report but for his hopes of retaining India as a united entity. The All India National Convention started as scheduled in Calcutta on December 22nd, but no officially appointed representative of the Muslim League arrived to attend its crowded sessions till December 28th. Following recitations from the Quran, Abdul Karim, the chairman of the League's reception committee, welcomed its delegates on December 26th at the opening of Jinnah's League's annual meeting in Calcutta on the eve of the momentous changes in the constitution and administration in India. Karim regretted that some forces were at work to divide the political strength of the Muslims of India at a time when vital interests, both of the community and the country, required that there should be solid unity. On December 27th, the League voted to appoint 23 delegates to represent it and take part in the deliberations of the convention called by the Indian National Congress. That deputation, led by Mahmudabad and Jinnah, included 32-year-old Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan, 1896 to 1951. Who was to become Pakistan's first Prime Minister, and Chagla, who was to become India's Minister of External Affairs 1966 to 67. Chagla recalled that Jinnah was in favor of outright rejection of the Nehru report. After a long and protracted debate, we ultimately decided 3 important amendments. One was that separate electorates should remain. Second, that there should be reservation of 1/3 of the seats in the central legislature. And third, residuary powers should be vested in the provinces. Jinnah presented the Muslim case before the National Convention on December 28th. He insisted it was absolutely essential to our progress that a Hindu-Muslim settlement should be reached and that all communities should live in a friendly and harmonious spirit in this vast country of ours. Allahabad's Sir Taj Bahadur Sapru, ex-law member of the Viceroy's Council, rose to respond to Jinnah's plea. If you examine the figures, you will find that, including nominated members, Muslim representation in the central legislature is 27% and Mr. Jinnah wants 33. Speaking for myself, I would like you to picture Mr. Jinnah, whom I have known intimately for 15 years. If he is a spoiled child, a naughty child, I am prepared to say, give him what he wants and be finished with it. However, Puna's M.R. Jayakar, then deputy leader of the Nationalist Party in the assembly, spokesman for the Hindu Mahasabha at the convention, was less willing to pamper Jinnah than Sapru had been. I have also known Mr. Jinnah for the last 16 years in close association as a colleague in the nationalist life, and I can assure you that he comes before us today neither as a naughty boy nor as a spoiled child. One important fact to remember is that well-known Muslims like the esteemed patriots Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Dr. Ansari, Sir Ali Imam, Raja Sahib of Mahmudabad and Dr. Kichliu have given their full assent to the compromise embodied in the Nehru Committee report. It is further to be borne in mind that even in the Muslim League, a large body of members have given their assent to the Nehru Committee report. Mr. Jinnah therefore represents, if I may say so, without offense, a small minority of Muslims. He knew, of course, just how offensive a slap that was to Jinnah's ego and sensitivity, and there was applause and many a thump of approval as Jayakar sat down. Jinnah responded softly, yet spoke with an intensity of control he had not publicly displayed since Nagpur. We are engaged today in a very serious and solemn transaction. We are here, as I understand, for the purpose of entering into a solemn contract, and all parties who enter into it will have to work for it and fight for it together. What we want is that Hindus and Muslims should march together until our object is attained. Therefore, it is essential that you must not get only the Muslim League, but the Mussalmans of India. And here I am not speaking as a Mussalman, but as an Indian. Would you be content with the few? Would you be content if I were to say, I am with you? Do you want or do you not want the Muslim India to go along with you? Minorities cannot give anything to the majority. It is therefore no use asking me not to press for what you call these small points. I am not asking for these modifications because I am a naughty child. If they are small points, why not concede? It is up to the majority, and majority alone can give. I am asking you for this adjustment because I think it is the best and fair to Mussalmans. We are all sons of this land. We have to live together, we have to work together, and whatever our differences may be, let us at any rate not create more bad blood. If we cannot agree, let us at any rate agree to differ, but let us part as friends. Believe me, there is no progress of India until the Mussalmans and Hindus are united, and let no logic, philosophy or squabble stand in the way of coming to a compromise, and nothing will make me more happy than to see a Hindu-Muslim union. He must have sensed that the restless jury he addressed had made up their minds against him long before he reached the end of his argument, surely by the time he said, "Let us part as friends." For this marked a major point of departure in Jinnah's life, an even sharper veering off from the road of Congress and all it represented than Nagpur had been 8 years earlier. He had delivered his swan song to Indian nationalism. The dream stirred by Dadabhai's ringing voice in Westminster's Commons, nurtured by Morley and Feroze Shah, enriched by Gokhale and Montague, all those long-lost liberal giants were dead. Born thespian that he was, Jinnah spoke his lines to a packed, if not always friendly, house before each curtain fell on a major act of his political life. Nagpur had ended Act 1. Calcutta finished Act 2. This time there would be a longer intermission.